After nearly 4 years of war, could an end to the conflict in Ukraine now be within touching distance? Top-level talks have been held in Abu Dhabi and Geneva, with two plans drawn up to end the conflict. But at what cost for Ukraine? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the finer details are still being hammered out, but it seems a peace plan to end the war in Ukraine is close. European countries have put forward a proposal to counter one drawn up by America and Russia, which would have seen Ukraine give up territory and reduce the size of its military. President Volodymr Zelenskyy says the country now faces one of the most difficult moments in its history.
A plan for peace, compiled by the US and Russia, has sparked a flurry of diplomatic ping-pong that could finally bring an end to the conflict. Donald Trump set a deadline for the Thanksgiving holiday, urging Zelenskyy to take the deal.
You mean he doesn't like it?
It's unclear. He was sort of
He'll have to like it, and if he doesn't like it, then, they should just keep fighting, I guess,
European leaders have learnt by now how to deal with Trump. They've come back with a counter-proposal.
We want peace, but we do not want a peace that is a capitulation, one that puts Ukraine in an impossible situation, that essentially gives Russia free rein to continue pushing further.
But there remains a major disagreement over the most fundamental issue, whether Ukraine should be a neutral state or be aligned to NATO and host Western troops on Russia's border.
Leaks, fantasies and reality. These are the outcomes of the talks on Ukrainian settlements in Geneva. It seems that Trump is unhappy with neither Kyiv nor Brussels, who are trying to influence him and push through their own vision of the situation.
As strikes in both countries continue, in the Ukrainian city of Kharkov, people are sceptical.
The plan would mean surrender and giving up territories, but also Ukraine's interests and independence, something we have fought for all these years. All of this would now collapse and nothing would be left.
Our attitude is absolutely positive. We can stop this insanity, but to be frank, we have little hope.
A few hundred miles away in Moscow, there's slightly more optimism, but not much.
Unfortunately, nothing good came out of talks so far. Even out of a meeting they had a month or two ago in Alaska. I would like the combat activities to end and peace to return. We hope they'll reach an agreement. That's what the politicians are for in the end.
People on both sides of this conflict are tired and ready for it to end. But after so much blood and treasure spent, will it take a Christmas miracle?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining me in the studio, we have Ian Proud, a former British diplomat who served in Thailand, Afghanistan and Russia. Also with me is Svitlana Morenets. She's a Ukrainian journalist and staff writer at The Spectator. And we have Paul Ingram, who's an academic programme manager at the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge. And joining us remotely from Cape Town in South Africa, we have Michael Bociurkiw, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Svitlana, to you, do you think we're getting to crunch time now, that something is going to happen?
No, I don't think it is going anywhere. For the peace negotiations to be successful, both sides need to be willing to do some compromise. And currently we have Ukrainian leadership that is actively involved in negotiation with the US. And it appears that some kind of new version of the original 28 points peace deal was agreed. But I'm convinced that Russia won't accept this deal, and even they wouldn't accept the original 28 points peace plan because they are not willing to do any compromises. They just set ultimatums for Ukraine, and they want Ukraine to accept all of the Russian terms, which is, of course, impossible.
Paul, to you, same question. Is this the end game?
Actually, I would agree with everything that's just been said. I think that people were talking about the 28-point plan being a Russian thing, but actually it was a Trump proposal. Well, not even a proposal, just a list of points, fantasy land. Trump was basically combining some of the things that he heard in Anchorage with a sort of mafioso sort of approach to try and screw the Ukrainians and the Russians into a situation where the Americans and Trump himself will get a lot of money out of the situation. So I don't think it's serious, and I don't think we've taken a step forward in any way in the last few days.
Ian, what's your take on everything that's been spoken about since the weekend?
Well, the war has to end. Europe can't afford for it to continue. The Americans aren't providing any more money. People are still dying. And the peace plan was the start of a discussion. That discussion's happening, as far as I understand. The biggest risk I see to this landing is the Europeans' reintroduction of conditions on NATO membership for Ukraine, which is never going to get past the Russians. So that leaves this process dead in the water, it seems to me. But let's see what happens.
Michael, to you, just your observations over the last few days, President Zelenskyy has said Ukraine is facing an impossible choice. He's not wrong, is he?
Absolutely not. And I'm not going to be the contrarian here. I agree with everything that's been said so far, especially by my Ukrainian colleague. Look, I was just at the G20 in South Africa, and you could really feel the frustration among world leaders on how to deal with a very erratic, unpredictable Donald Trump. I think if there's a silver lining out of this, I think we're heading to a point now where a lot of countries are going to be following the lead of Mr. Lula in Brazil, standing up to Mr. Trump and not falling for his mafia tactics. But, it does make me sad as someone also of Ukrainian heritage who sees how Europe has been totally excluded from the process for a long, long time. So, it seems to me we have this high-speed train going very quickly with Russia and the Trump team on it. You have Mr. Zelenskyy on the platform wanting to run up to it and get on. And then you have the Europeans still fumbling for change, trying to get onto that platform.
Just another point to you, Michael. Senator Mark Warren is the highest-ranking Democrat on the U.S. Intelligence Committee. He said the other day that this deal is so bad it reminded him of Neville Chamberlain appeasing Adolf Hitler. Would you go along with that assessment?
Yeah, it's a real circus out there with Marco Rubio involved, Jared Kushner, Witkoff, and a few others. Look, at the end of the day, it's going to be Mr. Trump who decides what's going to happen henceforth. And it'll all depend on what mood he's in, what perhaps someone whispered into his ear at the last moment. But what I'm fearing, because you also had the Mr. Driscoll in Kiev, who's close to the U.S. vice president, who is very isolationist and anti-Ukraine, it seems to me. So you have these parties involved very, very deeply in the process with competing interests and agendas. And then with Mr. Trump chiming in from time to time, it couldn't be a messier set of circumstances for Ukraine right now. It appears to me that Ukraine is continuing to play nicety nice with the Americans, afraid to upset them. But I think there's going to come a point very soon where they're going to have to stand up and say, no, this is the way it's going to be. And, one more thing, if I may, Mr. Erdogan of Turkey gave a very impressive press conference at the end of the G20 Leaders Summit. And he made it clear that Turkey is going to continue to play a very big role in the peace process. And I hope that turns out that way. I mean, we've been all over the place in Europe and Abu Dhabi, but it's really Turkey with the biggest stake in Ukraine, Black Sea security. Mr. Erdogan has Putin and Zelenskyy on speed dial. I think the ball should go back into Turkey's hands and settle this once and for all.
Thanks, Michael. Svitlana, from a Ukrainian perspective, how difficult would it be giving up territory as large as the Donbass, which is clearly what Putin wants?
When we talk about territory, it's important to remember that there are still hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians living there, and giving up land and people that Russia couldn't capture since 2014 would be unacceptable for Ukrainian nation. And any leader, doesn't matter if it is Zelenskyy or somebody else, if he were to sign the deal, it would be politically unsurvivable, but also the Ukrainian parliament would never vote to approve it. So it's the non-starter from the beginning.
Paul, just on that point, territory clearly will have to be exchanged under any peace plan. This puts Zelensky in an extremely difficult position, doesn't it?
It does, but beyond Parliament, there is a very strong sense that Ukrainians, Russians, and indeed Europeans, people are tired of this war. There are, as has been said, hundreds of thousands of people that have died, millions of people displaced, huge cost across the continent. The imminent reverse colour revolutions across Western Europe as a direct result of this war. The costs are so extraordinarily large that I think people need to be starting to think the unthinkable. Every back-channel conversation I have with Ukrainians, with Russians, with others, involves transfers of territory de facto for the foreseeable future. So we need to be thinking what is described as the unthinkable, and not just with territory, but with all sorts of other dimensions, because the alternative is an ongoing war for many years, more hundreds of thousands of people dying, even more damage and destruction to the integrity of Ukraine and to the integrity of Europe. And this is unacceptable, should be unacceptable to all of us. So solutions need to be found.
Ian, just on that point, diplomacy in Europe at the moment, did you get the impression last few days, Keir Starmer, Macron, Merz, they've all really been scrambling to keep up with the frenetic pace set by the Trump administration?
Well, there has been no diplomacy in Europe. Europeans talk about forcing Putin to the table, but they refuse to engage directly with Russia, and therefore Trump is eating their lunch. I mean, that's why they found themselves in the position that they have, that since 2014 they've refused or significantly reduced diplomatic dialogue with Russia, and now the US is in the driving seat. So they only have themselves to blame, really, that they found themselves left out of this process.
And just tell me, what realistically more can Europe offer Ukraine? I mean, what's the mood like in London, Paris? Are people reaching the end of the road in terms of support for Ukraine? Are you getting that impression?
Everybody wants to support Ukraine. The future Ukraine should be prosperous and democratic. That isn't possible while war is continuing. But unfortunately, European leaders are clinging on to this strategic defeat delusion that they can somehow win on the battlefield, which they can't. And they're being left out of the conversation because of that. While, as you say, actually, nationalism is rising across Europe as members of the public feel that their politicians are just not smelling the coffee.
Michael, to you, is there a sense that the peace talks are quite a useful distraction for both President Trump and President Zelensky? They've both had very awkward, difficult couple of weeks.
Yeah, and in a certain way, and it's very complicated for Mr. Zelensky right now, given this corruption scandal. And I think the U.S. re-entry, if we can call it that, into the process was deliberately timed because they know things are not going well for Ukraine on the battlefield. They know Mr. Zelensky is in a difficult spot right now as a lame duck president, having had this scandal happen around him. So I think they were using typical Trumpian bully tactics to push Ukraine to sign an agreement. But as I think it was Svitlana who said, no Ukrainian president could ever sign what's been agreed to. But, you know, it does, I think it does boggle the mind to see where we are right now when you have also, you mentioned Mr. Putin, who is waging his hybrid warfare to the max in Europe and in the United Kingdom. To think that the Russians use their spy ship to not only spy on submarine cables or map submarine cables near the United Kingdom, but also shining military-grade lasers into the eyes of our AF pilots, above what else has been happening too, mysterious drones, in European airports. So, what will it take? What is the threshold for a NATO collective response to this kind of hybrid warfare? And that is why Mr. Putin is getting away with what he is that he knows he can probe and probe and probe, finding soft tissue, and he goes further. The Europeans should be very, very worried, especially the Poles right now, for more antics, violent antics from the Russians. God forbid that there's a miscalculation or mistake and civilians get cut off in all of this.
Thank you, Michael. Svitlana, talk to me about how damaging the corruption allegations have been the last few weeks in Ukraine. What are people saying?
So it's definitely hit Zelensky's reputation, although there are no proofs that he was involved in the corruption scheme, but these were his close associates who were accused of stealing money from building fortifications for Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And of course, Ukrainians have been outraged because the money are being stolen during the war. Especially when Ukrainians are every day donating to the soldiers, trying to buy them more drones because the government can't provide enough, and at the same time millions are stolen. So people have been demanding from Zelensky to make the audit, to fire everybody involved, to launch the investigations. And there's been a feeling that it hasn't been enough from Zelensky. He fired like the energy and justice ministers, but people demand more. But it was the moment when the peace deal from the US news struck. And of course, the focus shifted from the corruption scandal because for Ukrainians, at the first place is surviving the Russian invasion and then the corruption. But of course, corruption has to be fought even during the wartime.
Paul, just come in on that phrase Michael used, a lame duck president. Is that what Zelensky now is?
Oh, I think that's a bit binary. I think he's certainly weakened by it. And I think there is a real challenge that he's having to face back home those corruption scandals at the same time as negotiating. His support is critical for his legitimacy. He hasn't faced an election for many years, and that also adds to the challenge. But ultimately, he's not the only leader facing these challenges. Trump is facing huge challenges back at home. Pretty much every European leader is facing significant political and economic challenges that mean that they talk tough, but they don't have the money. If I were Zelensky and the Ukrainian government today, I would be feeling very insecure about any practical support coming from the Europeans over the next 2 or 3 years.
Ian, to you, just on that point, we know Germany's economy is flatlining, the French have huge debt problems, the UK has no money or growth. How much of an issue do you think that is in terms of them getting anything meaningful for the Ukrainians?
It's massive because Ukraine needs 50 to 60 billion US dollars every year, starting from December, to keep fighting a war. If it wants to do that, preferably it should sue for peace, and the Europeans just don't have that money. The Belgians are blocking the transfer of this so-called reparations loan, which is really a loan to kind of enable war fighting. So nobody has the cash for this, and Trump isn't going to provide it. So I mean that gives an additional impetus to the need for some sort of peace deal, however painful, the compromises that will be involved in that.
Why would the Belgians be blocking the transfer of money for Ukraine? Well, just explain that to us.
Well, they're blocking it because Euroclear holds about 50% of all the immobilized Russian sovereign assets since the start of the war. And they're saying, well, actually, we're taking all of the risk. And none of the other European member states are offering to kind of back up that risk by saying, well, we'll help you out if these assets have to go back to Russia. And it's for that legal reason. But they're also worried about the wider reputational damage to Belgium from other developing world economies that say, well, we're not going to put our money in Europe anymore.
So do you feel Europe is quite fractured at the moment? Because initially we had a very strong show of support, and then this coalition of the willing, which the messaging around that, when I heard it, was there's clearly quite a few in Europe who are very unwilling.
Well, Central Europe has been creeping more towards nationalism, as we know in Hungary, Slovakia, in the Czech Republic. Germany is facing the rise of the AfD. In France, Marine Le Pen's party, the Reform Party, is gathering ground. But within European member states, yes, there is a kind of gradual fracturing. And at this time, the European institutions are trying to kind of centralise it over greater power, which is somehow making the problem even worse.
Michael, to you, just give us your impression of where Europe is right now in terms of this coalition of the willing. And, they're saying the right things, but in terms of material support for Ukraine, I'm guessing Zelensky possibly feels a little bit lonely right now.
Words don't stop Russian missiles the way Patriot missile systems do. So I think the feeling also in Ukraine is enough talk and, supportive words from the Europeans. We heard it yet once again in Johannesburg, time and time again. But your guests have very articulately put it. Europe is basically bankrupt. It doesn't have the resources to help Ukraine. But today, tomorrow even, Belgium, under pressure from the Europeans, could unlock that money because, yes, your guests are perfectly right. It's desperately needed. And, yes, the Belgian leader says we have to be careful about our reputation. There's also money being held in other countries. Why do we have to shoulder the weight? But what I would say to that is better to deal with Mr. Putin now, because if you don't, you're going to have to spend a lot more later building bomb shelters and kindergartens and schools all over Europe to protect from his aggression, whether it's direct or through hybrid means.
Ian, you were shaking your head there.
It's just not going to happen.
What's not going to happen?
The Belgians, and it's great to have the Americans telling us how to kind of run our business, but sorry, but I just don't see it landing.
You just don't see the Belgians?
No, the Belgians have drawn some hard concrete barriers against doing that with no guarantees provided. Bart de Wever said when he raised this issue, he wasn't met with a tsunami of enthusiasm around the European Council table, which tells you an awful lot.
And can I come in on that?
Yeah, of course, Paul.
Because I've just come back from China, where I've been having conversations with them about their relationship with Europe. And one of the complaints that they receive is that Europeans don't have confidence in the rule of law in China. Now, if this money is taken and then spent, then the world will have no confidence in the rule of law in Europe, because everybody's money is open to being taken if the European governments decide, oh, we can use this to do whatever we like with. So that's the essence of the importance of the reputation to the future of the ability of Europe to engage with countries like China and other countries across the world.
Thanks, Paul. Svitlana, talk to me about security guarantees, because if a deal is hammered out in the next few days, would you be confident as a Ukrainian that Russia will abide to it and Putin will stop?
No. I think every Ukrainian is traumatized by a fear that Russia is going to invade again and again. And even right now in Ukraine is talk, even if the peace deal is reached, we should prepare for the next war. We should be strong enough. And I think if talking about security guarantees, we should start that there should be no limit for Ukrainian army numbers and for the weapons that Ukraine can possess. Because when you set those limits for the country that is defending itself, you are just inviting Russia to invade again, because Russia won't have any limits. They won't shorten their army, or they won't stop producing some weapons. They will continue preparing and expanding their military. So Ukraine should do the same. As for security guarantees from the Ukrainian allies, I'm skeptical about the coalition of the willing. If they're going to locate their troops in Kyiv or Odessa, as they're saying, or in Dnipro, what's going to change? And if Russia attacks again, what are they going to do? Are they going to flee? Or what's going to happen with that? So Ukraine was hoping for some kind of NATO-style security guarantees, but I don't see that there are countries willing to commit to that level to send their troops into Ukraine if Russia attacks again. So it's a really complicated question on that.
So your fear is that Russia will simply sign any deal, take the Donbass, keep Crimea, reduce Ukraine's military, and then rebuild, and at some point attack you again?
Yes, especially if Ukraine withdraws troops from the parts of the Donetsk that Russia still couldn't capture. There is like a main fortification belt and main Ukrainian defenses. And after that is just an open field, and Russian army could just march up to the Dnipro River. And that is one of the reasons why Ukraine doesn't want to withdraw its army from there, because Russia would take years to capture actually those defensive positions, but to give them for free for Russia, it would be a suicide.
Ian, give us your sense of European history here. We mentioned Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler earlier on, nearly 90 years ago. This strikes me as being a similar situation with as much at stake.
Well, I think the Munich analogy is a really poor one, but the one way in which it does resonate is that the reason that Munich happened was because the main powers of Europe were unwilling to fight for Czechoslovakia, in the way that the main powers of Europe have been unwilling to fight for Ukraine right back to 2014, 2022. So it's easy to see why Ukrainian people think that talks of some NATO Article 5-style guarantees being hollow, because when NATO had opportunities to actually support Ukraine militarily before, it has not taken them, and even today doesn't appear likely to take them. So that's my sense. So the Europeans, I mean, the British Army is shrinking by 300 personnel, every month. No European army is equipped, apart from the Turkish army, to kind of level any sort of force, and they don't want to anyway. So I mean, and the Americans won't. So that leaves us with hollow promises and big commitments that we've hitherto been unwilling to back up.
Michael, final point to you. Your sense of European history right now, is this a week that we will remember for decades to come?
Sadly, yes. The previous speaker hit it bang on, and there's just not the means, the political will to really backstop the Americans if they leave. And, perhaps the way the war is transitioning to more high-tech warfare with drones, that sort of thing, Ukraine can continue to fight for quite some time. But, the Europeans only have themselves to blame. And again, I brought this up with Mrs. von der Leyen the other day, is why was there this drip, drip, drip approach to providing Ukraine with weapons, the tanks, the fighter jets, all of that sort of thing. Had they given everything Ukraine asked for at the beginning, we wouldn't be where we are right now. A very, very sad time for Ukraine. We're at an existential moment. And even if Ukraine agrees in part to that first draft we saw of this so-called peace deal, that would be the end of Ukraine as we know it in terms of sovereign integrity and that sort of thing.
Michael Bociurkiw in South Africa, thank you so much for your time on this roundtable, and to Ian, Svitlana and Paul Ingram as well here in the studio. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.